The restaurant exploded with confusion. A piercing alarm wailed through the hall, slicing the music in half. Chairs screeched. Someone yelled, "Smoke! Fire in the kitchen!" And panic scattered across the golden floor like spilled wine. Kelvin Osei's tray fell from his hand, glasses shattering around his shoes. But his eyes weren't on the fire or the crowd. His eyes were on the old man still seated in the far corner. Everyone else was moving, but that man wasn't. He sat perfectly still, staring at nothing, unaware of the chaos rising behind him. Kelvin's stomach clenched. He shouted, Sir, we have to go!" No reaction. The man didn't turn. He didn't even flinch. The smoke rolled in heavier, clouding the chandeliers. People shoved each other near the exit. Someone screamed, but Kelvin broke the other way, running straight into the smoke. He reached the table, touched the man's arm gently. The old man startled, finally looking up. Confused, frightened, Kelvin realized then the man was deaf, completely deaf. Kelvin's heart raced faster. He crouched low, waved to get the man's attention, then moved his hands in calm, practiced rhythm. "Fire! It's okay! I'm here!" The man's eyes widened as he read the signs. He trembled but nodded. Kelvin grabbed a napkin, wrote fast, "Follow me! Hold my arm!" The man stood, legs shaking. The air was getting hot now. Flames flickered through the kitchen doorway. Kelvin pulled off his jacket, wrapped it around the man's head to block the smoke, then guided him toward the emergency exit. Every breath burned. The sound of cracking wood echoed somewhere behind them. "Move! Get out of there!" someone shouted, but Kelvin didn't stop. He half-carried the man down the hall, pushing past terrified guests. His eyes watered. The exit glowed ahead through the haze. When they finally burst through the door into the cold night air, Kelvin dropped to his knees, gasping. The old man coughed hard, gripping Kelvin's sleeve like a lifeline. His lips moved silently. "Thank you." That was the moment the crowd noticed them. Phones came up. Flashlights flickered. A woman whispered, "He saved that old man." Someone else said, "Isn't that Mr. Adler, the billionaire's father?" The words spread like sparks. Minutes later, sirens howled and red lights painted the pavement. Paramedics rushed in. Kelvin stayed beside the man, steadying his shoulder as they checked his pulse. Then, a black SUV screeched to a stop. The driver jumped out before the car fully halted, a man in a dark suit, panic in his eyes. "Dad! Dad!" he yelled. It was Lance Adler, the billionaire everyone had been waiting for. He ran toward the scene, breathless. "Dad, are you okay? Are you hurt?" His father blinked at him, confused, unable to read his lips in the darkness. Lance tried again, louder. "Dad, can you hear me?" The old man frowned, shaking his head. He looked to Kelvin for help. Kelvin quickly stepped forward, his hands moving fluidly in sign language. "He's asking if you're hurt," Mr. Adler signed back, and Kelvin translated for Lance. "He says he's okay, thanks to me." Lance stared at Kelvin. You can sign?" Kelvin nodded. "Yes, sir." Lance's gaze lingered a second longer, as if searching for words that wouldn't come. He finally said, Thank you so much." Kelvin only nodded, stepping aside as medics lifted Mr. Adler into the ambulance. The billionaire climbed in after his father, but before the doors closed, the old man reached out a trembling hand, touching Kelvin's sleeve once more, his silent way of saying, "Don't disappear." When the ambulance pulled away, Kelvin stood in the flashing red light, exhausted. Guests murmured his name. A few clapped, but most just filmed. He didn't care. He exhaled long, looked up at the smoke rising over the restaurant roof, and whispered, I kept my promise." The next morning, news headlines screamed about the fire. "Billionaire's father saved by waiter in late-night blaze." Kelvin didn't read them. He was already back at work, cleaning the mess, sweeping the blackened floor. Mrs. Hall, the manager, stopped beside him. "You're on every blog, you know." Kelvin shrugged. "Doesn't matter, just glad he's alive." That night, as the restaurant reopened with fewer guests, Kelvin saw a familiar figure entering quietly. Lance Adler, no cameras this time. He walked straight to Kelvin, who froze, unsure what to say. "I came to see you," Lance said. "My father won't stop talking about you, or signing about you, I should say." He smiled faintly, awkward. "He says you spoke to him when no one else could." Kelvin dried his hands. "I just did what anyone should do, sir." Lance's voice softened. "Not anyone would have run back into that fire." Kelvin didn't answer. He just nodded again. Lance hesitated. "Can I sit?" "Of course." They sat at a corner table, the same one Mr. Adler had used. The lights were dim, the chatter low. Lance watched Kelvin's hands, still slightly red from burns, and said quietly, "You know, I didn't even know my father could smile like that until yesterday." Kelvin smiled a little. "He has a warm smile, sir. Just needs someone patient enough to see it." Lance's eyes flickered. You're right about that. There was a pause. The clink of glasses filled the gap. Lance leaned back. You said something last night before the ambulance left. What did you say to him? Kelvin looked down at the floor for a moment. I told him he's safe, and that I was there. Lance nodded slowly. He said that felt like hearing music again. Kelvin didn't respond, just gave a tired smile. After a long silence, Lance said, You'll be hearing from me. My father wants to invite you to dinner at our home when he's better. Kelvin blinked. Me? At your house? Yes. Lance's tone softened again. He insists. Kelvin chuckled faintly. I'll need to check my schedule, sir. Lance grinned. Fair enough. He stood and extended his hand. Thank you again, Kelvin. You did more than save a life last night. Kelvin hesitated, then shook it. You're welcome, sir. As Lance left, Kelvin watched him disappear into the Los Angeles traffic. For a brief second, he allowed himself to breathe. He didn't know yet that the dinner invitation would change everything. A week later, Kelvin Osei stood at a tall iron gate, smoothing the sleeves of his only good jacket, while a camera above tracked him. The Adler estate rose beyond trimmed hedges and a spiral fountain. A guard checked an iPad, glanced up like the name didn't fit the person. Invitation? The guard asked. Kelvin held up his phone. From Thomas Adler. Dinner. The gate slid open. Phone off inside. No photos. I'm not here for photos, Kelvin said. Through glass doors, a woman approached, tall and precise. I'm Mara, head of communications. Keep this private, please. No gestures that invite press speculation. I'm here because Thomas asked me, Kelvin said. They entered a room the size of a small hall. Art on the walls, fire behind glass, and at the center, Thomas Adler with hands folded, eyes lighting when he saw Kelvin. He tapped the armrest twice, the way someone taps when a favorite song starts. Kelvin signed, steady. Good to see you. Thomas signed back. You came, thank you. How are your hands? Better. You? Thomas glanced down the hall. Lance Adler appeared, tie loosened. 2 glasses of sparkling water. He looked tired, but his shoulders eased at his father's smile. Kelvin, glad you made it, Lance said. Dad's been practicing. He keeps teaching me things I should already know. Thomas signed to Kelvin. He is stubborn. Lance tried to mirror it, clumsy but sincere. Thomas laughed silently and patted the seat. Dinner started beneath a ring-shaped pendant light. Mara hovered with an NDA until Lance waved her off. They ate slowly. Lance asked, Where did you learn to sign? School. My sister, Kelvin said. We signed at home. It made the house feel quiet but full. Thomas's face changed, asking without words if she lived. Kelvin shook his head once. I'm sorry, Lance said, and left it there. A chime sounded. Mara returned with a tablet. A journalist at the gate says he has a gift for Mr. Adler. He'll leave after. No, Lance said. He mentioned Kelvin by name. Thomas signed, no journalists. Not tonight. Mara left to tighten security. After dessert, Thomas gestured toward the garden. They stepped into mild evening, the fountain whispering. Thomas signed, I feel peace when hands speak. Words were walls for so long. Hands are doors, Kelvin signed, from the dark flashes. Sliced the hedges, paparazzi beyond the fence. Voices carried. Mara hurried out. They climbed the service lane. Police are on the way. A man shouted, Kelvin, one question. Did you set up the fire? Did you stage the rescue? Thomas stopped. Kelvin turned toward the fence, shock tightening his chest. Lance snapped, Enough! Go home! The voice rose. Your father's miracle is good for your image, Mr. Adler. Convenient, huh? Kelvin felt the old anger that knew how fast kindness becomes a headline. He signed to Thomas, Ignore them, focus here. He touched his chest twice, then pointed to Thomas's heart. Thomas nodded, breathing steadier. Security pushed the press back, but a drone drifted over the garden. The buzz crawled across the water, growing louder. Thomas's hands trembled. His balance wavered. Kelvin signed big and simple. With me, breathe, in, out. Thomas mirrored him, shaky but present. A guard snagged the drone with a pole. It cracked on stone. The garden went quiet except for the fountain and someone's ragged breath. Inside, Lance said. In the living room, Thomas sank onto the sofa, eyes closed. Lance stood across the rug like bracing for impact. Mara hovered. Say it, Kelvin said. Say what? Lance asked. What you're thinking, Lance exhaled. Mara's right to worry. This is becoming a circus. You're part of the story now, Kelvin. Not everyone believes good things happen for good reasons. Do you? Kelvin asked. I don't know what to do with you. Thomas struck the armrest, a sharp knock. He signed, fierce. Stop. He is not a problem. He is a person, Kelvin translated. Lance stared at his father's hands, as if they'd always been speaking and he'd only now looked up. Thomas continued, slower. If he leaves, I will not speak tonight. Silence held. The fire behind glass breathed. Mara cleared her throat. We can draft a statement. No statements, Lance said. He looked at Kelvin. Stay, please. Kelvin nodded. The heat in his chest faded. They sat again. Thomas reached toward Kelvin's hands, not to hold them, but to punctuate rhythm as they signed. Minutes slipped by while Lance watched and stumbled through phrases until Thomas's face brightened at each improvement. Mara retreated. The house settled. Near 10, Kelvin stood. Thomas signed, Promise you will come again. I will, Kelvin signed. Call if you need me. At the door, Lance followed. I was wrong, he said. About you. About a lot. Change doesn't need to be loud, Kelvin said. Teach me, Lance said. I want to speak to him without fear. Then start how I did, Kelvin said. One sign, one moment. Keep showing up. They shook hands. Outside, cool air cleared Kelvin's head. He walked toward the gate, phone still off, heart even. If you're watching, type I hear you in the comments and subscribe for more human stories. Your support helps this reach someone who needs it. At the sidewalk, a shadow peeled from the curb. The same journalist stepped into the streetlight, holding a small box wrapped in silver paper. You forgot your gift, the man said. Kelvin didn't take it. What is it? A mic, the man said. Wear it next time you visit. Let the world hear what goes on in there. Or open it now. There's a note you should read. I don't play games, Kelvin said. The man smiled without warmth. Then you won't mind if I publish what I have already? Headlights washed over them as a car turned the corner. Kelvin glanced at the gate. Inside, a figure moved. Lance, or security. The journalist lifted the box closer, voice low. Careful, hero. Stories burn longer than kitchen. Kelvin Osei didn't sleep that night. The journalist's words replayed in his head like a bad echo. Stories burn longer than kitchens. By morning, his name was trending again. Hashtags mixed praise with suspicion. Hero, waiter, or PR stunt? One headline said. Others claimed the fire was a setup. Someone had posted a blurred photo of him outside the Adler mansion, claiming it was proof of insider connections. Kelvin scrolled for a while, then threw the phone aside. He was done reading. He tied his apron and went to work. The restaurant was quieter now. People whispered when he walked past, pretending not to. Mrs. Hall cornered him near the counter. You've got calls all morning. News stations, a talk show, even some brand offering endorsement deals. I'm not interested, Kelvin said. You should be, she said, lowering her voice. Not every day a waiter makes the headlines for the right reason. Kelvin looked up, tired. Ma'am, when it stops being about doing right and starts being about getting likes, it's no longer right, she sighed. You're too decent for this world, Kelvin. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an unfamiliar number. Lance, Dad isn't doing well this morning. Keeps asking for you. Could you come by? Kelvin paused. His pulse steadied. Without replying, he untied his apron. Mrs. Hall, tell them I'm taking the rest of the day. She frowned but didn't argue. Go on then. When Kelvin arrived at the Adler estate, the air felt heavier. The usual guards nodded him through. Inside, he found Lance pacing the living room, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, looking less like a billionaire and more like a son who'd forgotten how to fix things. He had a panic episode, Lance said quickly. He tried to sign something about noise and then just shut down. Kelvin sat beside Mr. Adler, whose eyes were unfocused. Gently, he touched his wrist to bring him back, then signed slowly. You're safe. Quiet now. Just you and me. Mr. Adler's eyes flickered with recognition. His breathing eased. Kelvin? Yes, I'm here, Lance exhaled. You make it look easy. It's not easy, Kelvin said softly. It's human. He guided Mr. Adler through a short exercise, matching breaths with hand gestures, until the man's heartbeat calmed. Then he took a notepad and wrote, Do you want to talk? Mr. Adler shook his head, then pointed toward Lance. His fingers formed hesitant signs. He needs to listen, Kelvin translated. Lance rubbed his neck. I'm listening, Dad. I swear I am. Mr. Adler pointed again, not with ears, with heart. Lance froze. The words hit harder than he expected. He nodded once, eyes glistening. All right, teach me how. Kelvin reached between them, took both their hands, and moved them gently through basic signs. Love. Sorry. Proud. Lance repeated each one, clumsy but earnest. His father watched with tears pooling in his eyes. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of meaning. Hours passed. They sat together, no noise but the rhythm of their gestures. When Mr. Adler finally dozed off, Kelvin stood. "You're good with him," Lance said quietly. "Better than I ever was." "You still can be," Kelvin replied. "He doesn't need perfection, just presence." Lance leaned back. "You talk like a preacher." Kelvin smiled faintly. "Just a man who's learned the cost of silence." Lance looked up. "Amma, right? Your sister?" Kelvin's face tightened. "How do you know that?" "Your story's everywhere," Lance said quickly. "The blogs dug deep. I didn't ask them to." Kelvin's jaw clenched. "That's her name, not their story." "I'm sorry." "She was 9, Kelvin said, eyes distant. "She got sick at school. The nurse thought she was pretending because she couldn't say where it hurt. They waited too long. By the time I reached there," he stopped, breath catching. "She was gone. I learned to sign so I'd never misunderstand someone again." Lance nodded slowly, the weight of the confession settling between them. "You don't just speak with your hands," he said. "You live with them." Kelvin gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe. It's how I hear the world." They sat in silence for a moment, until Lance's phone buzzed. He looked down, his expression shifting. "It's the journalist," he said. "He says he has footage that could hurt you. Claims he'll release it if we don't pay him off." Kelvin straightened. "Footage of what?" "No idea. Probably fake. But if it spreads, it'll destroy both of us." Kelvin crossed his arms. "Then let him. I won't trade integrity for comfort." "You don't understand, Kelvin. My company, my reputation can be rebuilt. Character can't." Lance stared at him, torn. "You really believe that?" Kelvin nodded. "It's the only thing that's kept me standing. Just..." Then Mara rushed in. "Lance! He posted it!" They gathered around her tablet. The video began shaky, grainy footage from the restaurant's back corridor on the night of the fire. The caption read, "Waiter enters kitchen minutes before blaze erupts." The video cut off before the explosion. Lance's face drained of color. "They're making it look like you started it." Kelvin leaned closer, watching carefully. The timestamp blinked faintly at the bottom corner, but it didn't match the fire report time. "That's doctored," Kelvin said firmly. "I was serving table 12 when that footage was supposedly taken." Lance grabbed his phone. "I'll get my tech team to prove it," Mara interjected. "It's already viral. We need a public statement now." "No," Lance said sharply. "We don't throw him under the bus to save face." Kelvin raised a hand. "Let it breathe first. The truth survives fire better than rumor." But outside, protesters were already gathering by the gate, some holding signs saying, "Fake hero," others saying, "Justice for Kelvin." By nightfall, the front of the Adler mansion looked like a news circus. Drones hovered again. Police lined the sidewalks. Inside, Kelvin sat by the window, watching lights flicker across the garden. Lance stood behind him, pacing. "If this keeps spreading, it'll break my father. He can't handle that kind of stress." Kelvin's eyes stayed on the glass. "Then stop fighting it with noise. Let him speak instead." Lance frowned. "What do you mean?" "Tomorrow," Kelvin said. "A live statement, but not from you, from him. He doesn't talk. He doesn't need to. He signs." Lance stared, processing. Slowly the idea settled in his mind. "You think people will listen?" "They'll feel it," Kelvin said. "And that's louder than anything we could say." Lance exhaled. "If this fails, it'll ruin both of us." Kelvin turned toward him, calm. "Then at least we'll go down telling the truth." Morning light spilled across the Adler estate, catching the reporters already staking out on the front lawn. Cables tangled across the walkway, tripods sprouted like weeds, and the buzz of cameras built into a dull hum. Inside, the living room had been rearranged into a studio. Soft lights, 2 armchairs, and a translator from a local deaf advocacy group stood waiting. Lance Adler adjusted his tie nervously while Kelvin Osei set down 2 mugs of tea on the table. Thomas Adler sat in one of the armchairs, calm, composed, his eyes following every movement of his son's hands. "You sure about this?" Lance whispered. Kelvin nodded. "It's time he tells his story his way. No microphones can twist sign language." The translator smiled. "Ready when you are." Lance gave a small nod to the camera crew. The red light blinked on. He began. "Good morning, everyone. You've seen the headlines. Some of them lie, some of them guess, but none of them ask the one person who lived through that night. Today, you'll hear from my father." He stepped aside. Thomas lifted his hands, movements slow but sure. The translator's voice followed. I could not hear the alarm, I could not hear the fear, but I saw hands reach for me, hands that told me I was safe. The world called him a waiter. I call him my friend. Kelvin stood quietly at the edge of the frame, not wanting the spotlight, but the camera found him anyway. Thomas continued. I was trapped, not just in fire, but in silence. My son could not reach me, but this man could. He did not save my life for fame. He did it because that is who he is. The translator's voice cracked slightly. Do not believe every loud story. Believe the quiet ones that ask for nothing. Kelvin's throat tightened. Lance watched his father, realizing he had never truly seen him speak before. Thomas turned his hands toward his son. You do not have to speak to be understood. You just have to care enough to listen. Lance blinked hard, then began signing back, awkwardly, haltingly, but honest. The translator didn't even speak this time. The message was clear, father and son communicating without sound, tears reflecting studio lights. The feed went live on every major network, then clipped into short reels across social media. Within hours, hashtags flipped. The waiter who listened, hands speak truth, Kelvin Osei. That evening, Kelvin's phone nearly melted from messages, offers, interviews, endorsements, but he ignored them all. Instead, he sat with Thomas and Lance in the same living room, no cameras, no audience, just three men who had survived different kinds of fire. Lance broke the silence first. You were right, he said quietly. Noise isn't the enemy. Ignorance is. Kelvin smiled faintly. Ignorance burns faster. Thomas signed to both of them. I want to build something. A place where silence feels like home. Kelvin frowned. What do you mean? Lance translated. He wants to open a foundation for the deaf. Classes, therapy, sign language training. He wants you to lead it with him. Kelvin froze. Me? Thomas nodded, his hands spelling each word. You hear what others ignore. Teach the world that. Kelvin couldn't speak for a moment. I don't have the money, the education, or... Lance interrupted, smiling for the first time in days. You have everything that matters. Leave the rest to us. Kelvin exhaled slowly, disbelief melting into quiet pride. Then we start small. One classroom, one teacher, one child who never has to feel unheard again. Thomas's eyes softened. That is how change begins. Weeks passed. The fire story faded, replaced by new scandals, new distractions. But something different was growing in downtown Los Angeles, a glass building with clean white walls and bold letters that read, The Hands That Speak. Foundation. Opening day buzzed with reporters, children signing shyly to each other and volunteers from both the deaf and hearing communities. Kelvin walked the halls, watching joy ripple through every room. Lance stood beside him, dressed down for once, greeting guests. At one corner, a little girl tugged Kelvin's sleeve and signed, Thank you for making a place for us. Kelvin knelt. No, thank you for using your voice. As the crowd thinned and the sun began to dip, Thomas took the small stage for the closing moment. His hands spoke, graceful even in age. My whole life I thought silence was loneliness. But this young man taught me silence can be love if you know how to listen. May every hand here tell a story. May every heart here learn to see sound. The audience stood, clapping. Some signed applause instead, hands waving softly in the air. Kelvin felt a lump in his throat. For the first time in years, he thought of Amma, her tiny hands signing at breakfast, her laughter that never made it to sound. He closed his eyes briefly and whispered, You see this, don't you? Lance came over, resting a hand on his shoulder. She'd be proud. Kelvin smiled. She's the reason I kept listening. The crowd began to disperse. Children ran through the open space. Parents laughed. Cameras clicked, but none of it felt loud. It felt alive. Outside, night rolled gently over the city. Kelvin stood by the glass doors, watching lights shimmer on the street. Lance joined him, coffee in hand. You ever going to take credit for any of this? Lance asked. Kelvin chuckled. Credits for people who stop working. I'm just getting started. Lance grinned. You really don't like fame, huh? Kelvin looked out at the street where people were still signing to each other. Fame fades. Impact doesn't. A soft breeze carried faint music from a nearby street performer. Kelvin watched two kids sign along to the rhythm, their fingers dancing with the melody. He whispered, almost to himself, Amma, they're hearing the world like you did. Lance followed his gaze and nodded. You gave my father his voice back. You gave me mine too. Kelvin smiled, modest but proud. You just had to listen. They stood there for a while, the city lights flickering like silent applause. A car passed, honking twice, breaking the calm. Kelvin chuckled and turned back to Lance. Guess the world's never really quiet. No, Lance said, but now we know how to hear it differently. Kelvin nodded, then faced the camera one last time, this time by choice. His eyes steady, voice low and warm. If this story touched something deep inside you, take a moment to let it live beyond this screen. Subscribe, leave a comment that says, "I hear you," and share it with someone who's forgotten that compassion still exists. Sometimes, the smallest act of listening can change an entire life.